he's in Austin right now. He had sort of a last-minute trip to go there, so he apologizes for not being here. Today we have an awesome meetup, Playmaker. How many of you have heard of Playmaker? Okay. So it's kind of cool, you know, it's a way to program without using programming. So it opens up the doors to Unity for a lot of people who otherwise might not even try to use Unity. And so Jenna and Creath are going to be presenting on this today.
Thanks for coming. We're going to go through a couple demos tonight, showing you how to use Playmaker, and get started by just giving you some background on who we are. My name is Creath Carter. I'm actually not a programmer at all. I have been in the game industry professionally for a little over 10 years, and for about 3 years now full-time I've been working independently on my own work. Playmaker is basically the tool that allows me to do that. I went to college for art. As somebody who grew up drawing and playing video games all the time, creating them was my, heart's desire. But I've never had the technical know-how to really get into the nuts and bolts of it and make things work. Though I've tried several times. I've taken multiple coding classes, and I'm just too much of a visual, wrong-sided brain person to make that happen. But with Playmaker, also this isn't like an advertisement or anything like that. Well, we were trying to figure out a way to present this to everybody without gushing, and we have a lot of pros and cons we'll go over throughout the course of our talk. But we're both just super stoked that we can actually create fully fledged games using this tool. I think that covers it for me, really. I have 3 kittens. This is one of them. And I have a video. Do you know the term?
We're going to be jumping in and out of our presentation a lot tonight, so I apologize for any tech weirdness that occurs.
Yeah, if you want to pause that. Also to preface this, this is just a short demo of the prototypes and games that I've created over the last 3 years with Playmaker. I'll go in depth with them a little bit more here and there as we go on, but just to give you an idea of the things that I've done. Also, just to summarize that, my focus is on educational games. I do make my own games I have 3 kittens, I mentioned. I make my own games on the side, but my focus for my own work is to, unlike a couple of the games in there, make games that are non-violent, that have some sort of a message, social or political. And at the same time, I co-founded an educational game studio last year with 5 other developers in the Boston area called PBn'Games, and a lot of those games that I just showed are part of our suite for 3 to 6-year-old age group. And that's pretty much it for me. So, Jenna.
I'm Jenna. I'm going to stay seated because I'm lazy and closer to the computer this way. So I've been in the games industry for about 7 years. I started in art and have always wanted to learn how to program, but my college decided that the programming department my sophomore year just was no longer a thing that they should support. They were still teaching basics, so I guess it's kind of understandable. So I've never really learned how to program. I always wanted to be able to make my own games, so I started exploring tools that would let me do that. I used GameSolid for a couple of years. I think a few of you guys may be familiar with that, and ultimately jumped or grew into Playmaker. I've been using Unity previously in my job, and so it was kind of a natural jump. This past summer, I founded Little Worlds Interactive to make awesome educational games. You can see some screenshots from our current game. This is called The Counting Kingdom. I've been exhibiting it everywhere, so hopefully at least some of you guys have seen it. I'll show a quick trailer. Also an educational game for kids. Between these two videos, you're starting to see some of what Playmaker can do. We are both one-person development teams, and so all of what you have just seen came from us individually. I've been working on my game for less than a year, and if you didn't know that, when I tell people I don't know how to program, they generally are surprised. So let me give you a quick overview of what Playmaker is. Basically, it's a plugin for Unity. It's available on the App Store right now for $95, but they have sales all of the time. I think I got it for $60. I've heard of it going as low as $15. So keep an eye on it. Even at $95, it's an absolute steal. Basically, it is a visual scripting system for Unity. So you can put in programming logic without needing to actually understand the text syntax of programming. You don't need to type at all. You can drag and drop things in. As you can see, it ends up looking a lot like a flowchart. They call this a finite state machine. I think that's just a fancy word for flowchart. It really just means that you can only ever be in one node at a time. So you do end up with a lot of FSMs, which is a much easier thing to say. You have a lot of FSMs in your scene. I generally have probably a couple dozen running in my scene at any given time, just because you end up with a lot of different managers and then all of your different game objects that have interactivity generally will have at least one or more FSMs on them. One other notable thing is that each of the basic units in Playmaker is fundamentally a C# script. So while I'm really excited about this tool because I don't know how to program, it's also a phenomenal tool for programmers to prototype and for teams with programmers to make very custom actions for their game. That's one of my favorite things about Playmaker is half the time when I'm stuck, I go on the forums and someone says, oh, I wrote a custom action for that one particular thing you're trying to do, so you can just download it and add it in. So instead of it really being a walled garden, it's very, very extendable. And because it's gotten so big, a lot of other developers who have popular plugins like GUI, like EasySave, have developed Playmaker Actions to let Playmaker interface with their tools. So even though I don't know how to program, I can use Playmaker to talk to the majority of the other major plugins that are available on the Asset Store. So it makes my life very, very easy. Next slide.
Yeah, that's me. So just to expand on what she was talking about a little bit, I'll let you know a little bit about what a finite state machine is, how it works. I'll keep this brief because I know everybody wants to just get into the nitty-gritty of it and look at how it works specifically. But first of all, state machine, like she said, it's a way of visualizing logic circuits. It is very much like a flowchart, and she's not wrong that you could just think of it like that. Essentially, in a state machine, state machines were developed for visualizing and designing logic-based computer programs. It's used not just, this is a very high-level version of a state machine where some are used just for code, and you so often don't even have the same kind of interface that you would with Playmaker. But they're not new to game development either. I first learned about state machine visual scripting based game development when I was in college in the mid-90s. I went to a college for art, as I mentioned before, and myself, I had the fortune to fall in with some of the best minds of the industry today, who were also students at the time, and all of us wanting to make games without any access to programmers, because at that time the indie game scene wasn't really at such a grassroots level. One of our guys went out and found software that would allow us to do it, which was something that we hadn't encountered before. The one that we did the most work with was Virtual's Dev. Evidently the company was formed in '93, but we didn't discover it until '99. So this was a commercial product that is still available today, but they kind of disappeared around the early millennium because, well, my theory is because they were so expensive. Essentially, at $5K a seat, you got the basic application, but that wasn't even as much as Unity gives you for free now. You had to purchase things like the physics add-on pack and the multiplayer add-on pack and the AI add-on pack. And basically that added up to almost $50,000 once you were done, which made it very, very inefficient for small studios to use. But it was the most similar to Playmaker that I know of to date. Unlike Playmaker though, well, I'll get to that strength later, but for the time being, it saw several commercial releases. It still continues to see commercial releases, like Subsurface from Little Chicken. I guess Little Chicken frequently, I think they're a Montreal-based studio, but I might be wrong about that. I could be mixing them up with somebody else. But they are continuing to release small games using Virtual's Dev, which is now owned by no longer the Virtuals Corporation, but by 3D Via, which is a Montreal-based developer and publisher. Also, Beasley's Buzzwords, the guys that I went to college with, after we all graduated, went off and formed Flashbang Studios, and that was their first release that they created based on Virtual's Dev before they switched to using Unity. And Siberia 1 and 2 were probably the most visible of those released with this tool set, because they actually got it onto the console and saw quite a few sales to where we're actually looking at the third release of that game sometime this, or that series sometime this year or next. Before we discovered Dev, we were using Motion Factor's Motivate, which was a much rougher and more rudimentary tool set. Motivate didn't have nearly as much user-friendliness as Virtuals did. It was also extremely expensive with $7,500 a seat, but once you started releasing titles, you were pretty much bankrupt unless you wanted to go in debt to them. And there was only one commercial release for that, which was Prince of Persia 3D, which that was the one right before Sands of Time, the birth of 3D on PC, so if anybody remembers that groan. And then beyond that, everybody's probably seen Kismet and the Unreal Material Editor. Kismet isn't exactly, what's that?
Spaghetti.
Oh yes, yeah, that's part of the reason I picked that one. It's not actually a finite state machine, it's more of just a visual scripting editor for gameplay. It's probably the least technical of all of them, but because of its visibility to the industry, I included it in there just because it's similar in interface. And if people know how to use that, then rolling over to Playmaker is pretty simple. What these tools all do not do that Playmaker does exceptionally well is allow you access to the lowest level of code that you can get. As Jenna will go into later, it's essentially just a series of C# scripts with a very, very well-designed user interface on top. I can script everything from, well, I'll get into what I've done later, but you can do everything from database applications to just regular user software, not just limited to games and entertainment. And Virtual's dev still relied on their own scripting language as a companion to their visual scripting editor. Motion Factory's Motivate was hardly usable without going into their proprietary script to accompany what you did in the visual script. And Kismet, of course, only really gives you access to the gameplay mechanics that are built in and come with Unreal. Whereas Playmaker doesn't really, it kind of does away with all of that and gives you full control. It's really a programming language in a visual package. Also, I wasn't aware of this until I started doing research for the talk, but I guess Bohemian Interactive has also created their own proprietary state machine editor for their games. And I'm sure that there are many, many others as this style of editing and authoring becomes popular out there that we just don't know. Lastly, these are some of the FSMs that you'll see, editors that you'll see for non-game specific design. These are just for generating raw code or interfacing with XML files and such. I think some of these, they don't even actually let you graphically manipulate the states themselves in the way that we'll show you how to do that tonight in Unity. A lot of these, you just write the code and it visualizes it for you. Has anyone in here ever used any of these? Yeah, a little bit?
No.
What's that?
Those there know, but Kismet and Playmaker.
Okay. Yeah, I meant the code-based ones because I didn't actually encounter these before. And then of course, in closing for this little bit, you're probably all familiar with these, and if you are, you already have a leg in on using Playmaker because just the fundamental idea behind generating nodes that have different functions and then hooking up in a hierarchy is exactly what it's all about. So, Jenna will show you what it's all about.
So everyone roll up your sleeves, we're making a game. And the screen here is super, super tiny, so this is going to be a challenge, but we'll do it together. So, in this game, you are a monster. This was an art asset I had handy. You're going to shoot potions to the right because I didn't have any like bullets or anything like that. You're going to shoot potions, and there will be monsters that randomly spawn on the right and move left. So you want to shoot. You are a monster, you want to shoot other monsters, potion. Straightforward. Next triple A. So, let's select our player, and I already have an FSM set up. If I did not, basically what you do is you click on an object, right-click to add FSM in your Playmaker editor. Very, very simple. FSM will start with one state and the start state pointing to it. So basically this just means that when this FSM initializes, which most of the time is going to be on run, it's going to jump into that state first. So the fundamental components of an FSM are states, actions, and events. States are these nodes that you can move between. Actions are the things that happen in the nodes, in the states. So right now you can see this is where the actions would normally show up, and you can see that these are all blank. Playmaker ships with hundreds of actions, and as I mentioned earlier, you can download custom actions for most tool sets. You can see I have a whole bunch of 2D toolkit specific actions, but on top of that, it comes with just really a bazillion of them, to the point where I've been using this for a year, and just today I discovered a new action I've had in one of his projects. I was like, holy shit, this is amazing, and it's going to help me so much. So there are a ton of actions, and each of these is a C# file. So you can open it, you can edit it, you can add new ones, you can take out ones you don't want to use. So it's very, very easy to really look underneath it. So we have our states here, and the way that you connect those states is through events. So we have states, actions, and events. So let's start by having let's start with our player controls. So we want our monster to be able to move up, and we want our monster to be able to move down, depending on whether we hit the up arrow key or the down arrow key. So let's name our first state listen for keys. So here we're just going to put actions that basically are listening for these key presses. So with actions, we want to get key down. Let's go with the up arrow first. So we're going to select our up arrow, and then we need to send an event. So I'm going to jump over here. We're going to name our event up arrow pressed. So now we we can select that here, and it's complaining because I don't have it linked over here as well. Over here it calls them transitions. I find that very confusing. Transitions and events are the same thing. So now I just need to connect this event/transition to our other state. So let me just show you what that looks like when we run. So you can see that our episode is staying on the first state, but as soon as I hit up, it jumps to state number 2. With me so far? Alright, so state number 2, we want to actually move our little monster. So we're going to find a translate action. And for game object, we want to do use owner. Here we need to specify a completely different game. Put in vector 3 here. I really just want to affect the y coordinate. So we're going to put in 200, and we want it to be per second in every frame. So let's see what this looks like now. So we hit up. It doesn't stop, is the problem. So we need another listener. And this time I want to get key up instead of key down. But we still want this to be our up arrow. We want to send a different event. So let's say key released. And so we're going to leave that back to our first state. So this, we're release refer. Excellent. Okay, so now we're jumping back and forth between these 2 states. And we want to do the same thing for moving down. So I'm going to copy paste. We want the down arrow. We're going to do a new event, so we're going to call it down arrow press. Down arrow press. So I need to add that over here. Connect it. I'm going to be lazy and copy paste these as well. Translate, we want this to go down, so I just need to add a negative. Get key up. We want this again to be the down arrow, and we need to add our transition. So in about 3 minutes, we have a working player controller. It's obviously drop dead simple, but I hope this gives you a good impression of generally what it is possible to do very, very quickly. So I cheated and already put together the rest of the game. I hope you'll forgive me, but I figured it would be faster. So I'm going to run you through it very quickly. So the player character has 2 different FSMs right now. We have the movement FSM, which we just created, and we also have our shoot FSM. So this is also a key listener. This is listening for the space bar. And when that is pressed, it moves over to this state, which is spawning a potion prefab that I've already created down here. It's spawning it at the player. So I basically just dragged in the player object down to this spawn point. So wherever we are on the screen, it's going to spawn on top of us, but with a 50 pixel offset. So it's spawning it just a little bit to the right. As quickly as it spawns the potion, it will jump back to this state. So you can just keep hitting space, and it's going to spawn those basically as quickly as you can hit it, including if you're moving up and down. The reason these are 2 different FSMs is because you can only ever be in one state at a time. So if you're trying to move and shoot, those are going to start overriding each other, so separating them out is generally the best idea. So let's see what our potion does. All of these are very, very easy. So the potion, as soon as it is created, it moves. It's just going to move to the right. It is also listening for an event, so it's listening to see if it collides with an object with the tag called monster. So as soon as it does that, it jumps over to the destroy state. This action over here is grabbing the monster that it collides with, storing it in a variable, so then in this state we can reference that variable, grab the monster, destroy it, and then the potion will destroy itself. So let's see what the monster is doing. This is the easiest prefab of all. It starts and it moves left. So the monster doesn't even have to deal with what happens when the potion hits it, because the potion is 100% taking care of that interaction. Literally all the monster knows how to do in life is move left. And last but not least, we have our spawner. This is a little bit more complicated, but really not too badly. So in this state, we are creating a random wait time. To do that, I have a random float action, so it's basically picking a number between 1 and 4, storing that in a variable, and then it's going to wait for that time before it jumps to the next state. And then we're spawning our monster. And I didn't want the monsters to all spawn in the same place, so it's spawning basically anywhere on the right-hand side of the screen. The way we're doing that, first is we're taking a random float between -300 and 300, saving that in a variable, and then we're creating a vector3 variable, which basically is just an XYZ coordinate. So for our X coordinate, we have 400, because that's the right-hand side of the screen. That worked out nicely. And then our Y spawn point, which is the variable that we just created up here, is the number we just created up here randomly, and then 0 for our Z coordinate. So this will always be creating something that's 400, some random number, and then 0. And then lastly, we're just creating a monster at that spawn point. So this is going to wait for some amount of time, spawn monster. Wait for some amount of time, spawn monster. So let's see what this all looks like in action. Okay. Pew pew. So you can see there's no limit on the amount of potions I can send. There's no way to win this game. There's no way to lose this game. But, the basic functionality is here. If you wanted to add in some sort of scorekeeper, some way to win, some way to lose, it would probably take you another 10 minutes. So, global game jam in half an hour. Hooray. So let me show you quickly something a little bit, well, a lot bit more complicated. So this is what my basic scene looks like. And all of these objects in the hierarchy with the red icon have Playmaker FSMs on them. So just to give you an indication of sort of how far down the rabbit hole you can go, you have something like this. This is relatively tame. Let's see if I can find something a little crazy. Yeah, it starts getting a little, makes you want to poke your eyeballs out sometimes. You're just like, what have I created? It's horrible. So I don't want to go into too much detail on this. After the talk, I would be happy to show anybody in detail if you guys really want to look through my gross spaghetti code. But I'm going to turn it back over to Creath to really show you some of the more exciting things you can do besides just spawning monsters.
Thing that Playmaker has not been able to answer for me. What is this cat's up right now? So, beyond that, speed is definitely the biggest benefit that I've had from Playmaker, and that goes even beyond just its ability to let me code my own games. To give you a few numbers, as you can see above, when I first got my hands on it, I think I started using Playmaker in April of 2011. And, well, yeah, it says it right there, excuse me. The first thing I did was create a test project that was simply 5 levels strung together with a beginning and an end, because as you probably all know, one of the most difficult things about working in games is actually completing something. So before I knew if I would be able to actually take this where I wanted it to go, I needed to make sure that it could at least give me 5 loading levels, a title screen, and credits. And that took from starting fresh in Playmaker 2 days over a weekend that I put it together. And if looking back at what Jenna just showed you, you could probably see how simple that is. And all of you, everyone in here uses Unity, so I assume. So you can put the elements together in your own mind for how hard it is to string together several levels and just have them transition between one another. But my first real project was one of the clips in the video with which was called Snow. That's kind of on hold at the moment, but I was aiming for a console release at the time, and it took me about 1 week. I don't want to say alpha, because if it were a major studio, you'd probably classify it as something else. But within 1 week, I had probably close to 24 individual gameplay mechanics in place, functioning in a world. And I can't overstate this enough. It is so fucking easy. That it's daunting. I'll come back to that later. But it surprised me just not, I mean, I have experience with visual scripting before, and I understand how code works, even though I am horrible at the syntax and can't write, it myself. I was just stunned at how fast things came together. Moving forward, I just rolled over from project to project to project, just trying out ideas. These are the ones that I really focused on and brought them to a level of alpha, beta, and a few of them completed. But I have so many prototypes at home that are not just, that look like something somebody would have made over the course of a month of hard work. And I did them in probably a weekend. 2 of the games, as you can see lower on the list, the Jades games, those are for my company PBn'Games, for our educational group, or educational software. And they're very simple games. Like I said before, aimed at an audience of 3 to 6. And as you all probably know also, aside from the biggest time investment in game development, which is the content creation, I literally completed the games up to a release candidate status, minus visual content, within hours. Alpha Blast was 4 hours of work, and I had a complete game that teaches kids how to use the keyboard and match letters with a scoring system, and it was the rocket ship one that just flashed letters on the screen. And then ZBzoo was the final one I showed, which is a remake of ZB Labs or Goomba Lab, which was our global game jam project that started my company off. And we did it with 8 people. We created that original project with 8 people in HTML5 over the global game jam weekend. But by myself, and including the content, the art and animation and everything, I rebuilt it in 3D in a week and a half. And those were a lot of sleepless nights, but it's just stupidly simple to put things together to the point where it's actually, that's one of the cons that I'll go into later. Because if you ever, I'll go into that later. Oh boy. So for now, let me switch over to another project. I'll go into some of the actual projects that that I'm talking about in a bit, and show you some of the code that you can, or that makes them. But for the time being, what I wanted to switch to now was basically how much, I guess, support around Playmaker that tool has. You can go to the asset store now, and just about every major plugin for Unity has some Playmaker extensions. And if those, sometimes people I've started seeing lately, people are starting to sell those extensions on the asset store as well. But for the most part, you can get an extension to any tool or component in Unity to use it with Playmaker, just off the forums, from actions that people will write to packs that Jean Favre, one of the main support guys on the Playmaker forum, he fields support all day long, and at the same time has enough time to spin out add-ons like Prearray Maker, which wasn't originally packaged with Playmaker, but you can download it separately, and it gives Playmaker fully featured array lists and hash tables. And of course, that comes with all the actions for Playmaker needed to use that. There are countless things like that. I should have pulled up the site and just showed you the list, but it goes on and on, and you can look later if you're interested in yourself. But for the time being, I was going to show you just a couple really simple things that I put together this morning to provide an example of that. So what I have here is just a basic in-GUI scene. Generally in my projects, I just have one object, one empty game object that is my game manager. And he usually has a few FSMs on it. This one only has one for the time being. And what I've created is essentially, just a really quick example of different, just utilizing in-GUI basically. I've created things like inventory systems and actually interface with database software before using this exact same set of tools just to pick up strings, store them in different variables and whatnot. But this took about 30 minutes just to put together. But it probably shouldn't have been taking me that long. I was watching the latest episode of Cosmos on my other monitor. This is all it is. This controls the flow of setting up the scene, and it just waits for you to click the buttons. And I have over on, where are you? Well, the individual buttons, because when you get the Playmaker in-GUI add-on pack, it's so small. The key thing you're provided with is this in-GUI Events to Playmaker FSM events. And that combined with the in-GUI Playmaker proxy object, which is just automatically loaded into the scene when it detects both of the components, is all you need basically to just drive data directly into whatever in-GUI interface you're making up. So on the buttons themselves, I have dropped this proxy or the event manager, and it just provides you a series of events. Sorry if this is confusing to look at, but I'm not used to working on this tiny thing, so you can get the gist of it. Hopefully this is just the inspector window. It just provides a bunch of default actions or events that you can edit if you want. And then when you go into Playmaker, so that's on the buttons, it's targeting Playmaker FSM. So when it receives, this event of being clicked on, it just sends an event to the Playmaker or to the game manager, and it takes it from there. This fires off events to all of the child elements in the GUI, and then I have a quick iteration state here that uses an int to just determine what of the three choices in the menu are presented, and it'll go back and forth between the three like that. That's it. The strings are just stored in string variables. I started to use Array Maker to do it, but that's just not really, since Array Maker is part of Playmaker now, basically. I just wanted to show what in-GUI is capable of. You're not, and this is one of the other great points about it, you're not limited to plugins in Unity that just happen to have Playmaker Actions ready-made for them. Playmaker has a wonderful feature that just allows you to directly grab and set properties and store component objects from any component within Unity itself. So in this demo, I'm using in-GUI again, but the purpose of this demo is basically just showing get set property. And I doubt anybody has a joystick in here or a game controller. I set it up for a game. No shit. Maybe I'll take you up on that in a second. But I set it up also for joystick interaction because that's one extra click, essentially. But in this demo, what I'm doing is just grabbing input. So I grab input from the slider. That's all it is. It's just a float from the slider with an operation on the float. And then it applies it to a ready-made action. I know, right? I pick a venue of 100 people to out myself as an abuser of small virtual children. But that's all this is doing. Is there's a ready-made action for setting the gravity property in Unity globally. So I'm just using that for that. But the get set property aspect that I wanted to outline with this is as simple as there's only one script in this entire thing, literally. That's the entire thing right there. Initialization, I just have it. Sorry. I hope none of you were overtly religious or offended. I apologize. This just sets the game manager as a global variable so that it's very easy for other FSMs in the scene to grab it. And this guy, let's remake him really quick just as an example. So I'm getting the property of the slider right there. I'll just kill it. Now it's not going to work at all. I'll still have, come on. So I'll still have the functionality. Oh, geez. Yeah, it's stuck in a variable infinity, I think, because I took that away. So it's not getting anything from there, and thus is probably multiplying the gravity variable by quite a lot. Anyway, so the connection there that I wanted to make an example of is essentially if I lock my FSM here so that I can click on other objects in the scene without losing focus on the script. I just need to go to the GUI and find my slider object. This is the in-GUI slider, which has the, see there's a UI sprite, the close transform, box slider, we don't need UI slider. So this is the guy that I'm grabbing. Good God. It's so small that it won't even let me move windows over now. So hopefully you guys can see that, and I'm sure you can see. And as you can see, if you've worked, does anybody in here work with GUI? Only a few of you? It's a phenomenal program. GUI and Playmaker are my best friends. I've made a lot of stuff with just them, and I've dabbled in other tools and stuff for fun, which have cool feature sets and everything, but I could not live without GUI and Playmaker together. Anyway, you can see the slider value there. So I go over to my FSM where I want to grab the variable or grab the property from that, and I can just drag the component straight out of there and put it into FSM and get the little setup, get property or set property. I'm going to get the property, use a slider. It automatically detects the object type, and then I can just get slider value. And I store slider value as the gravity float, and I'm already doing operations on the gravity float here to just make it more pronounced. Good. Something went wrong.
Where'd you go?
All good demos. Or bad. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So I'm not sure what happened there, but either way, the only other aspect, I won't bother with the joystick now, but just to show you how simple it was, I just had a second mode in here. Oh, for Christ's sake. I had a second mode in there where I could switch over to just a joystick control and just get input from two axes and control the global vector of the gravity variable. So that, just as an alternative example, since I have the axes hooked up to the input for the keyboard as well. She went away. There she is. It works that way too, but something extra I want to show. My final example kind of got botched at the last minute. I was going to show you guys a Playmaker Photon demo. And do you guys know what Photon is? Okay, Photon is yet another, it's like the Playmaker developers just kind of cherry pick these really promising or excellent middleware solutions and will make a series of actions for it. And they went a step further with Photon and implemented it into Playmaker by default itself. Photon is a cloud-based multiplayer server setup. The technical details of setting up a multiplayer environment are something that I've never even wanted to introduce myself to. It just sounds too much for me. I'll stick to regular gameplay. I wanted to set it up so that we could have her get into my environment at the same time. I can't do that. This is going to be a really crappy example, but it took me from 1:30 to 2:30 today. I set up, you'll have to take the inspector's word for it, but basically using the Playmaker Photon networking setup, which comes with this wizard. So you go to the website, you set up your account. It's free, by the way, at first. They have some unit of measurement that I'm not familiar with. So once your player base gets to a certain amount, or your traffic on their servers gets to a certain amount, they have other plans that you can pay for. So if you're going to run a massive multiplayer game, you throw a few $100s their way or something like that. But for just a couple people, it's free. And you just go set up your account. They will give you an application ID. You plug your application ID into this wonderful wizard. I honestly don't know the back-end details beyond that. What I do know is that it works. And one of my projects that I was so broken I wasn't able to show it in the video, I actually was able to get multiplayer functioning in it, and in an hour today get this really pathetic example set up. So you just pick your name and pay no attention to the connection moves because that's not hooked up correctly. But essentially, I'm now, if you want to, I hate that error too. If you want to take, never mind. Photon is crap. Don't. Either way, within an hour today, I was basically able, as an artist and designer, set up a multiplayer environment that allows however many people you want to put the work into enabling to connect. Beyond that, well, I was going to show some of my game scripts, but let's save that for the Q&A and afterwards if anybody wants more in-depth stuff or to see actual working examples of my projects. Jenna will take over here for you. Oh. So she has these like caffeine candies in her office. They don't work.
I think I broke.
No, they just don't work.
All right, so I want to talk about going beyond Playmaker a little bit because it's an amazing tool, but it's not the only tool for visual scripting that there is. Even if you want to stay within Unity, you have Antari's Universe and UScript as options. Honestly, I don't exactly know how they're different from Playmaker. They visually look very similar. It's a node-based setup. Playmaker seems to be a lot more popular. It seems to be a lot more foolproof. So we've had great experiences with it. We'd obviously recommend it, but check out your options.
Yeah, I've also never used either of those. The few forum polls that I've seen floating around, for whatever they're worth, everybody seems to largely like Playmaker, but I also think that Playmaker was the first on the scene, I think, anyway, so that may be it, but.
Yeah, but it's worth looking into what else is out there. So if you're like, I'm at Boston Unity Group tonight, but screw Unity, that's okay, we have options for you as well. These are all different visual scripting engines that are their own standalone programs. Like I mentioned, I used GameSolid for a couple years. It is very limiting, so I kind of want to move into Unity. But these are great first stepping stones if you really are feeling a little bit like a fish out of water, not quite sure how to start making your first game. I would definitely recommend looking into all of these. They all let you publish to PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. Some of them also let you do HTML5, and I believe one of them, I don't remember which one, but one of them I think also does Flash. They all let you make 2D games. I think GameMaker lets you make 3D games, but I'm not 100% positive about that. Some of them you can look under the hood and change the scripting, some of them you can't. GameSolid I know is very, very limited. Construct 2, I think you can actually jump into JavaScript if you really want to. GameMaker, I know, has its own scripting language specific to GameMaker. I think if you're going to learn a scripting language, you might as well learn one that you can use elsewhere. But that's kind of just my personal opinion. And if you're like, you know what, these are still too much, I just want very specific tools for my very specific game, that's cool too. If you want to make an adventure game, check out Adventure Game Studio, RPG Maker, pretty straightforward what you do with that. RenPy makes visual scripting, makes visual novels, so if you ever played Digital A Love Story or Analog A Hate Story by Christine Love, those were both made in RenPy. This mysterious icon over here is for Twine, which is an amazing, amazing program that lets you make interactive fiction. If you cannot pick up Twine and start using it within 5 minutes, I will do something ridiculous that we can talk about later. Twine is unbelievable. If you really want like a very low-level program to jump in and be very comfortable with, try Twine. You can also really customize it. Depression Quest, for example, was made in Twine. So the bottom line is, everybody in this room is capable of making games. I've heard so many people say, I don't know how to program, I have so many game ideas, but I just don't know how to make them. Here are your options. And this is just like skimming the surface. Check out makegames.pixelprospector.com for an even longer list of these. You will find something that you're comfortable with on the scale of takes some time to learn, but lets you do a lot, all the way down to very easy to pick up but more limited. There are programs all along that spectrum. So find some level that you're comfortable with and make games. That's what we're all here to do.
Oh, yes, pros and cons. So, as I mentioned, well, I'll get to that on negatives, but extremely fast turnaround. That is just mind-boggling for me. You can make multiple polished-looking things in days. The forum support, the community online is phenomenal. Alex Trules, who develops Playmaker and runs the website, very early on contracted to a guy named John Farr who basically handles all of the forum support and creates actions. But everyone there goes far above and beyond. The community is really helpful, and John or Alex will answer almost any thread that has a problem if it hasn't been resolved by another member. If you go on and request an action, someone will pretty much write it for you within a few days, if that. Finally, it really is infinitely extensible. I wanted to showcase this a little bit more in my demo, but we were getting long on time. But the ability to grab any Unity game object component and just pull it straight into Playmaker and set whatever property you wish, lets you muck with every aspect of the program in the editor. You can also, something I didn't show, was you could grab those component objects ahead of time and just manipulate them at runtime. So you're not limited to just tagging objects ahead of time during authoring. So for that, that has been such a boon in my life. Now, the negative parts. So from my experience, my FSMs can get out of control. Something we skipped over. That's one of mine. That was for, and it says Prearray Maker, but what I didn't realize when I put it up there was that's actually not Prearray Maker. That was it. No, that's very finely refined. It's just a really ridiculously complex script. That was for customizing the look of player selectable characters that had like several hundred different combinations. And I don't remember why I wrote it that way. This is a project that was like 2 years old. I just know that when I made that work, I was yes, and also I should never show this to anyone, which is why I'm showing it to you. But you can go insane with it, and when it gets that big, Playmaker bogs down to the point where you will, I'll get lag so that typing a string variable takes like 5 seconds for the characters to appear in the text field, to the point where it's unworkable. Like I've had projects that I quit because, probably just because of my bad design, but I've experienced it even when I've been, more efficient, just really slow. I'll skip over the soul crushing variable mode because it's not there anymore, But no, I gotta share the story. So imagine if your variables in a project randomly reassigned themselves different things. Soul crushing. But I haven't experienced that in at least 2 years. It was post beta Playmaker, but it seems to be gone. Pray you never do. And something that still occurs every so often, if I, so you notice I can directly target, we can directly target game objects with the actions. And you also have the option to find that game object at runtime and store it in a variable, so that if you're instantiating game objects during the game, you don't have to worry about it not being present in the scene, at all times. The problem with that is when you activate and deactivate them, sometimes they will just lose their connection. For some reason, the FSM will forget what that game object was if it's deactivated. Not destroyed and taken out of the scene, but just deactivated. And so suddenly you're sending events and messages to an object that doesn't exist. And that can be really hard to debug. Really minor bugs still sticking around, like the lag, not that big of a deal. And then the last one, which is really, it's embarrassing, but it is so easy to do that I have not finished projects because it has made me lazy. Like, I mean that honestly. It is so easy that I am, I'm going to play that new release this weekend. I can finish this at any time. And that's clearly a discipline issue on my part. But it enables you much greater freedom and speed to develop anything that you can think of, more so than any tool I've ever worked with before. And I've worked with dozens of game development tools. None like this, obviously, but lots. And accompanying that whole thing is just the feature creep element is so easy when all you need to do is, I think I should, maybe this game could use deformable terrain, and you can add it in one click. And suddenly you've got deformable terrain, and you're like, God, this is so easy. And then, of course, 6 months down the road, you're like, I can't find all the bugs in this deformable terrain because I just added it with one click. So clearly, from a novice, non-engineer perspective, it's easy to make mistakes and find pitfalls that way. I think that covers the basics.
The only frustration I've ever run into is every once in a while I'll download an action from the forum just because it's so easy and so perfect. And because they're user-generated actions, somebody has a bug somewhere and I don't realize it initially, and then I come back to it a couple days later and I'm like, I don't know why this isn't working. So sometimes it can seem like you've set it up perfectly, but there's a bug in the code and I'm not a programmer, so I have no idea how to track that down. So that's only happened once or twice. I've gotten a lot more careful about downloading things from the forum, making sure other people have kind of validated it first. So that's not Playmaker's fault, that's 100% my fault. There's just something to be aware of as you're, it's very easy, like you were saying, to get very excited about it and like grab all the different features and just throw them all in your game. So bug fixing is probably one thing that I've run up against a couple times, but otherwise it's been very easy. We obviously love this tool. We want you guys to love this tool. Everybody can use this tool. And that's it. So thank you so much. Do we have time for Q&A or should we wrap it up, Elliot? I know we ran a little late.
We have some time.
That's an hour ahead, right? So.
We have about
Yeah, but we
25 minutes before we have to make these.
So maybe a couple questions. So many questions, yes.
I know on the site it says it compiles to Android and whatnot. Do you know if it compiles for Xbox and PSN?
Actually, I would expect it does because it is based all on C# scripts, and literally it's kind of a wrapper for existing components. So they have a wizard that I haven't really delved into too much. myself yet, but that's not related to Unity or Playmaker. You drop it in, and it will put it into the format of an action to be used by Playmaker. I can't verify that that's 100% functional. Based off my experience with the rest of the program, I would say it probably works pretty well. And I wouldn't expect you would have any problems publishing to console that you wouldn't get publishing any game to a console just from the different platforms differences. But I don't know of any published games that have used Playmaker. But I wouldn't get that information.
So probably.
Two questions. First one is, how did you work around the deactivation bug that you discussed?
Deactivation.
Yeah, you said in the cons there was an issue where stuff would get deactivated.
It happens very infrequently, and in the times that it happens really infrequently. Like I've had it happen maybe 3 times in the last year, maybe, and that's it. But it's obviously a major concern, which is why I added it to the cons, because that's not. I know when it's something that I've made a mistake in, and when it's something that happened with the program, and from those instances, I believe all I did was specifically targeted the game object, made sure it was in the scene at runtime already. So I didn't have to worry about instantiating it, adding it to a variable, and having the variable get wiped out. So,
Or 2 questions. How does Playmaker handle enemy AI? Either of you had a chance to play around with that, or?
yeah, actually, yeah.
Because when it comes to coding, I think that's like one of the hardest things to get around.
Well, here's a small list of some of the more, what I would think would be the more complicated things that I've been able to do. And AI, I've done combat AI, I did the ZB Lab puzzle game, or ZBzoo now. That's a puzzle game where the entire, point is to learn the AI of the creatures and then base your observations on how to manipulate them through to the goal. And it's from my knowledge and background, it's kind of a natural fit because I can control what state an enemy is in at all times, and just depending on proximity or another variable, like if I want to get really in depth, I'll give them like fear or hunger or pain or something like that. And I haven't done this, but it would be trivial to. The Monster Sonic game that I did, the one with the plant that was destroying the city, with that one has civilians that run away, and they use the Unity pathfinding to find a way away from the player. There's soldiers that will track the player down and fire when they're within a certain range. But when the player creates, there was an ability in that game where if you use one of the abilities, it turns the surrounding NPCs into plant zombies. And so when they see the plant zombies, they'll turn around and run. Really basic stuff, but there were tanks, helicopters, and giant mecha in that game. And I think I had like 500 running at a time. And that's another thing that's a good point to make about Playmaker is that it doesn't bog down just because it's a visual scripting tool. I've worked with some like Virtuals and the ones I mentioned before where you're sacrificing performance in your game because you have this proxy that you're using to develop the code. And it makes games, a few frame rates slower and a little bit more sluggish. And Playmaker has none of those issues. I've made some ridiculously complex scenes. That city in that one clip, that city is entirely destructible, and I can have up to 2,000 active AI at any time in there. And that's no code at all. It's all code.
That question. So I know you guys work pretty much on solo projects yourself. And I'm like you guys, I don't code, done a lot of game design stuff, but I work with developers who can code, and I want to introduce it to them, get them more comfortable with working with it. But our bigger question is the concept of collaboration. I know Unity, has its own thing, versioning and stuff that we all know about, or a lot of people know about. But yeah, how would you approach that with how how modular can you make a bigger project that might be a coder and designer in tandem?
So I think that's a pretty common scenario. I've heard of a couple teams that will do that, where basically you just got to figure out what is the designer going to do, be able to do best, and what can the programmer do best. And I think when you have the designer setting up the logic and the flow, and then the programmer can put in kind of those custom actions, so that instead of the designer having to say, okay, if I want the zombie to come out of the ground, I need to do X, Y, and Z. If the programmer can just make action that zombie comes out of the ground, then all the designer has to do is throw that action in, and then kind of have this really nice custom prepackaged action. I think it can also be very helpful in situations. I was talking to Michael, where he is. Michael, we were talking earlier about this in particular. In my game, I would love to be able to run through all the monsters and see if there is a solution, if there is a move that the player can make. That theoretically is doable in Playmaker. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. And Michael, as a programmer, was like, yeah, I can make that work for you. So we were talking about him putting together a custom action where I basically just give it the input and it outputs the first solution that comes across to me. And so that kind of custom action makes my life 100 times easier. And it's one of the ways a designer and a programmer can interface using Playmaker to still give the designer a ton of control, which is always phenomenal, but letting the programmer really take away some of those major headaches.
So, how sophisticated can you make the AI actually? Because I know that you said you could make it rudimentary, which kind of blew my mind. At Fitchburg State, we've been using Rain, so we've been using Rain AI and Playmaker a bit. So, if we could like make everything shorter for our students, that would obviously be better. So, for instance, would you be able to make it so that your soldier can actually see somebody else? If
Yeah.
they can't see him, would they be able to hear somebody else or smell someone else?
Oh yeah, no, there's no limit really there. I mean, if you're, that's the big takeaway from this whole thing. I would think would be that, I mean, if you can code it, you can do it in Playmaker. I mean, it really is just an extension of code in a really, really well designed user interface. I would get rid of whatever the AI thing is you're using. Maybe the AI middleware that you're using, Rain, you said?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, but maybe it makes some things easier. Because again, in Playmaker, while we have all these wonderful actions that just shortcut us right to the end result that we're looking for and allow us to, manipulate everything to be as simple or as complex as we want, you're still building up from the ground. So you would have to write that AI. Like with the AI that I wrote, I can't remember exactly how the structure went. It was, I have a bunch of efficiency saving stuff going on so that it doesn't activate until a certain time. But when it does, then I will use a combination of proximity and physics volumes for player detection when it's talking about enemy AI. If I want hearing, if you wanted to do something with hearing, you could either do just a spherical volume around the character or just do proximity check. I can't remember which one of those is heavier, because with physics you're detecting what's hitting the volume every frame, if anything. And with proximity, I think I went with proximity in that case because, I didn't activate it until the player was within a certain, I think I had it trigger with, I think I went with proximity. Because it's basically every frame it's measuring the distance between the player. But you could do something like that. You could combine it with like a visual, cone for a field of view, and scent. I don't know.
And it could check for sound, because you would just look for that sound as a variable. I think that's what you were saying, that you could just.
I wouldn't phrase it like that. Like sound isn't really a variable. I mean, you could probably code something where your player was generating the sound effect, and then maybe you could do a calculation on the enemy AI where if it was within range of that sound effect, and the sound effect, I don't know how you would measure, maybe you could attach a float to that sound effect and do some sort of operation on that float so that you said, here's the sound effect. You'd have to simulate it, basically. I don't think there's any way you could really just say, oh, he hears it. You'd say, oh, he made a sound here. He's within hearing range, but the value has to be above 0.3 in order for it to hear, for the enemy to hear him. But I don't think you're limited in any way for AI. One of my projects is, I like AI, I like simulation with games. I think that's like the greatest ability or the greatest benefit from it is just to create a little world and watch it go. And one of my projects is a little ecosystem with foxes, rabbits, wolves, and mice. And they all just run around and they have food or hunger variables. It's The Sims with animals. And they have areas they can eat, and then they'll get into fights and flee or fight or whatever. And it's probably as complex as, it's simulating animal behavior, so, yeah.
I'd like to interrupt because there's a plugin called Behavior Designer, which has Playmaker Actions built into it. Behavior Designer is it's not a finite state machine, it's a behavior tree. And a behavior tree is quite similar to a finite state machine, except you can't arbitrarily switch states. There's always a hierarchical descending of nodes. And for anyone wanting to do AI in Playmaker, I strongly suggest Behavior Designer because it's very powerful. It also has all sorts of built-in actions and has built-in Playmaker and actually new script connections for that. And I actually use Behavior Designer in some of my projects. And I think
How much is it?
I think it's like 50 or something.
Affordable.
Behavior Designer.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
I have two quick questions. One, I may have missed this because I got here late. It was the source for all of the library of actions available?
So every action is a C# file.
Great, so when you buy Playmaker, you get access to all that stuff?
Yep.
And do they expose hooks to the profiler so you can see the parts of your script are slow?
Yes. Yeah, I think they do. I'm thinking about the comms tool, which I can't say for certain. Sorry.
Thank you so much. We'll be hanging around, so feel free to come and ask us any questions.
Again, I'd like to thank Jenna and Creath for coming down. And also, there was something in the meetup about going to Meet Hall. I don't think we're actually going to show up with 100 people. It might be kind of distant. So you're allowed to hang out here until they kick us out, or these guys walk off after that. And also, I just wanted to say thanks for coming. And if anybody here has any ideas or is presenting at another future bug, you can email either myself or Alex or both. We have a Unity Google group that's hooked up through the meetup page, so feel free to email us or contact us in person.
It's off. Our contact is on Google Find easier.
There also should be a video of this online, possibly slides and some other stuff for future.
Yeah, the slide is just a Google document, so we can share that tonight.
All right, thank you.